One storm-stained morning on the outskirts of Blackwater, a weary veteran named Jacob Miles thought his journey had ended. Just him, his loyal dog Rex, and $2 lonely left in his pocket. But then he saw it. A rotting wooden bridge, half sunken in mist, with a crooked sign that read, "For sale, 2 as is." Something in the wind whispered for him to stop. Beneath those cracked planks, he'd uncover a journal from another war, and a prayer that had been waiting 70 years to be answered. What began as a man's last act of faith would soon hold an entire town above the flood. This is a story about redemption, miracles, and the bridges God builds when we think all paths are gone. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. Let's see how far faith can cross tonight. The wind that morning carried the last breath of autumn away from the hills of Montana, leaving the valley of Blackwater wrapped in a pale, brittle silence. The air was sharp enough to sting the lungs, and frost laced the grass like tiny shards of glass. Across the river, mist clung to the skeletons of pine trees, their black spires vanishing into a sky the color of steel. The town lay far behind, a handful of roofs, a church steeple, and the faint sound of a freight train heading west. On the outskirts, where the dirt road curved toward the river, an old wooden bridge stretched across the water. Or rather, what was left of one. Its beams sagged like tired shoulders. The railings were split and missing in places, and moss crept up the pillars like a slow disease. Beneath it, the river murmured through the rocks, cold and indifferent, carrying the scent of iron and rain. Jacob Miles stood by his truck, watching the bridge with the weary patience of a man who had seen too much collapse to believe in miracles easily. He was 46, with shoulders still broad but slightly stooped from years of work and war alike. His face was carved with lines that told of both endurance and loss. A beard of 2-day stubble dusted his strong jaw, and his dark brown hair, streaked faintly with gray, curled just above the collar of his jacket. He wore an old olive-green military coat, frayed at the sleeves, a thick flannel shirt beneath, and jeans worn pale from long miles on the road. His boots were scuffed and cracked, their soles packed with the white crust of road salt. Jacob was once a military engineer, a bridge builder who had watched too many crossings blown apart during his last tour in Afghanistan. The memory still haunted him. The thunder of explosions, the sound of men shouting through smoke, and the way silence always came too soon afterward. Since his discharge, he had lived like a man caught between maps, never quite belonging anywhere. In the cab of his truck, a low bark stirred. Rex, his 7-year-old German shepherd, pushed his head out from behind the seat, eyes sharp amber beneath thick black brows. The dog's coat was a proud blend of black and tan, though age had silvered the fur along his muzzle and right ear, leaving a faint scar where shrapnel had grazed him years ago. Rex's ears twitched at every sound, yet his movements were calm, almost military, disciplined but never harsh. "Easy, boy," Jacob murmured, reaching to scratch behind his companion's ear. The dog licked his gloved hand, then rested his chin on the window frame, watching the river. Together they were 2 veterans of different wars, the man who built bridges to save lives, and the dog who once crossed them to find the wounded. Jacob exhaled through the cold, watching his breath drift away. That's when he saw the sign. It leaned sideways on one post, barely hanging together, its paint long faded, and the letters carved by hand. "Old bridge for sale, Tutuash as is." The 2 had been scratched over once, as if the seller had given up on asking for more. He huffed a laugh, dry and bitter. $2, he muttered, Guess that's about all it's worth. But something about the sight held him there. Maybe it was the way the bridge seemed to resist falling, or the strange dignity in its ruin. He walked closer, boots crunching on frozen mud, his breath trailing behind him. Halfway down the slope, he saw a small shack with smoke rising from a rusted chimney. A man stepped out to meet him. The caretaker, an old man named Earl Kavanaugh, though Jacob wouldn't learn the name until later, was in his 70s, with a hunched frame wrapped in a heavy wool coat patched at the elbows. His skin was rough as sandpaper, his nose red from cold, and his beard white and uneven like snow that never quite settled. His eyes were small, sharp, and surprisingly alive for someone who looked like he had spent his life fighting winters more than people. "Cold morning to be out looking for trouble," Earl rasped, leaning on a walking stick. "You lost?" Jacob shook his head. "Just ran out of road." "That happens out here." The old man's eyes followed Jacob's gaze toward the bridge. "You're not thinking of buying that thing, are you? It's older than both of us and one storm away from drowning itself." "What's the story?" Jacob asked. "Ain't much of one. County put it up for sale after the new concrete bridge was built 10 miles upstream. Nobody wanted it. Too far gone." The old man spat into the snow. "She's been standing empty 20 years. Folks say she creaks at night, like she's remembering who used to cross." Jacob looked at the bridge again. The boards were warped, the support beams bowed, and the handrails hung half-broken. Yet the structure still held, stubborn and unbent. "I built bridges once," he said quietly. "Maybe I can keep this one alive a little longer." Earl snorted. "You got money for that?" $2, Jacob said, reaching into his jacket pocket. He pulled out 2 crumpled bills, creased and soft from too much time in the same wallet. They were the last of what he had left, saved not for a purchase but for proof that he hadn't reached zero. The old man looked at the bills, then back at Jacob. "You serious?" "Seems I am." Earl took the money with hands that shook from age, not disbelief. "Well," he said after a long pause, "I reckon every lost thing deserves one fool who believes it's still worth fixing." He nodded toward the bridge. "You got yourself a bargain." Jacob smiled faintly. "Or a curse." "Depends what you build out of it," Earl said, turning back toward his shack. "Just don't expect the river to thank you." When the old man disappeared inside, Jacob stood alone again, staring at his purchase. The wind picked up, making the boards groan. Rex whined softly, pressing against his leg. "Yeah," Jacob whispered. "It's crazy, but maybe crazy's what we need." He grabbed his tool bag from the truck and walked toward the bridge. Each step echoed on the wood, hollow but not empty. Up close, he could see the grains of the timber, old but strong beneath the rot. The nails were rusted, the ropes frayed, yet the structure itself seemed to breathe. He ran his palm along the railing. Flakes of paint came away like ash. A single gull flew overhead, its cry thin and distant. The river below moved slow, gray, and cold as forgotten memory. He knelt, checking the support joints. The craftsmanship was old-fashioned, hand-cut beams, mortise joints, the kind of work done when people still believed in things lasting. Somewhere deep under the bridge, something creaked. Not the sound of weakness, but of age, complaining politely. "You've still got bones," Jacob murmured. Rex sniffed at the edge, tail flicking once. The dog's breath steamed in the chill, his gaze fixed on the far side of the river where the trees thickened into mist. "Guess we'll camp here," Jacob said. He set down his pack, unfurled a tarp, and struck a small fire by the bridge's entrance. The flame flickered weakly against the wind, but it held. As dusk fell, the world turned blue-gray, and the bridge's silhouette stretched long over the water. The sound of the river softened to a hum, and for the first time in years, Jacob felt something close to peace, fragile, unfamiliar, but real. He sat by the fire, Rex's head resting on his knee, and watched the bridge in the dim light. "We'll fix you up," he said quietly, half to the wood, half to himself. "You'll hold again." The wind rustled through the planks like a sigh, and Jacob could have sworn, just for a heartbeat, that the bridge creaked in answer. The next morning broke pale and quiet over the Blackwater River, the mist hanging low like breath that refused to fade. Jacob Miles woke stiff from the cold, the tarp above his head rattling softly in the breeze. The embers of last night's fire still glowed faintly, painting his weathered face in amber light. Rex stirred beside him, the German shepherd stretching with a groan, shaking frost from his thick coat. For a moment, the only sounds were the river's hush and the creak of the old bridge in the wind, like the world clearing its throat before speaking again. Jacob stood, joints protesting, and rubbed warmth into his hands. His eyes drifted toward the bridge. It looked even more fragile in daylight, its timbers dark with rot and the railings caked in lichen. Yet beneath its decay, there was structure, a stubborn endurance. He picked up his tool belt, the leather cracked and stained from years of use, and slung it over his shoulder. "Let's get to work, Rex," he murmured. The dog gave a low, approving bark and trotted beside him. The first step onto the bridge groaned under Jacob's weight, but it held. He began removing one plank at a time, driving the pry bar beneath the rusted nails. The rhythm was slow but steady. Lift, creak, exhale. The river below moved like dark glass, reflecting the outline of a man trying to mend something larger than wood. Every nail he pulled felt like unburdening a piece of himself. By noon, his hands were blistered and streaked with dirt. He paused to drink from a metal flask, the water tasting faintly of iron, and sat with his legs dangling over the edge. Rex lay nearby, head resting on his paws, eyes scanning the tree line with quiet vigilance. "You know," Jacob said to him, "most people would call this a waste of time." The dog's ears twitched, as if politely disagreeing. "Guess you're the only one who still trusts me," Jacob muttered, smiling faintly. A sudden gust of wind swept down the river, sharp and cold, carrying with it the faint scent of pine and something else, old wood, maybe, or memory. He picked up his hammer again. As the sun began its slow descent behind the hills, Jacob moved toward the center span. He crouched, prying at a warped board near the middle beam. It resisted, whining as he worked the metal bar beneath it. Finally, with a sharp crack, the plank gave way, and something small and metallic clattered onto the wood below. Rex barked once, startled. Jacob frowned, brushing away dust and splinters. Nestled between two support beams was a small tin box, rusted around the edges but still intact. He pried it free and sat back on his heels. The box was old, World War II era by the look of it, its lid engraved faintly with initials barely visible under the rust. EB. His pulse quickened. He opened it carefully, the hinges squealing. Inside lay a small notebook, its pages yellowed and brittle, bound with a piece of frayed twine. A faint smell of cedar and old paper rose up, carrying with it the ghost of another time. On the first page, in neat cursive that trembled slightly with age, were the words, "Father says every bridge is a prayer in wood, each nail a promise that someone will come home." Beneath the writing, a name, Emma Bell, 1943. Jacob ran his thumb over the ink. The script was delicate, precise, the hand of a young woman who wrote carefully, as if her words mattered. He read on. "They built this bridge before I was born. Father says it listens when the river gets angry. He says the planks remember the footsteps of everyone who crossed to go to war, and maybe, if we keep mending it, they'll find their way back." The page ended there, the next smeared with water stains. Jacob felt something stir deep in his chest, a weight both heavy and tender. He had built dozens of bridges in his life, some destroyed before they'd ever been crossed. But this was different. It wasn't just engineering. It was faith nailed together with trembling hands. As the daylight dimmed, he lit his lantern and kept reading. The entries grew fewer as the pages went on. Some were simple observations. The river rose high again today. Others were heartbreaks hidden in plain sight. They said his convoy never made it past the ridge. Father hasn't spoken all week. The last page stopped him cold. The handwriting was shakier, ink blotted from tears. "If anyone finds this, please keep the bridge standing. It's all that's left of us." Jacob sat in silence, lantern light trembling across his face. The night pressed close, and even the wind seemed to hush. He pulled a pencil from his tool pouch and stared at the blank space beneath her final line. For a long moment, he hesitated. Then he wrote, "I'll finish what you started." He closed the notebook gently and set it back inside the tin box, sealing it once more. "She believed in this place," he whispered, more to himself than the dog. "Maybe I was supposed to find her." Rex lifted his head, his amber eyes reflecting the flicker of the lantern. Outside, the river moved slower now, the current glinting with the soft light of stars. Jacob replaced the plank above the beam, but left a small notch beside it, a mark only he would know. As he stood, the bridge creaked underfoot, not in protest, but almost in acknowledgement. He took it as an answer. Later that night, he sat by his campfire, the tin box beside him. The flames licked the dark, throwing orange light across the bridge's silhouette. Rex lay close, chin on his paws, breathing deep and even. Jacob leaned back on his elbows, eyes fixed on the stars. He thought about Emma Bell, the caretaker's daughter, writing in the dark, waiting for someone to come home. Maybe her father never did. Maybe the bridge had become their conversation across time. He understood that kind of waiting too well. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the same $2 receipt. The old man had scrawled his name on. It fluttered in the wind before he folded it once more and tucked it beside the tin box. "Looks like we're partners now," he said softly. Somewhere above, the old timbers shifted, groaning against the cold. The sound was deep and slow, like a sigh or a whisper. Jacob smiled faintly. "Yeah," he said. "I hear you." The river murmured below, and for the first time, it didn't sound lonely. The morning the reporter arrived, the Blackwater sky was bruised with rain. Gray clouds hung heavy over the valley, and the river below the bridge churned with the weight of the storm that had passed overnight. Jacob Miles was already working, his breath fogging the air as he tightened a new beam beneath the deck. Rex lay near the toolbox, ears twitching every time a nail hit wood. The dog's fur was damp, his black and tan coat darkened by drizzle, but he stayed close, loyal and unbothered by the cold. The smell of wet timber and fresh-cut pine filled the air. Jacob straightened, his gloves slick with rain, when the sound of tires crunching gravel reached him. He looked up to see a blue pickup stopping near the edge of the road. A woman stepped out, closing her umbrella against the wind. She was in her early 30s, tall and slender, with a purposeful stride that spoke of someone used to chasing stories rather than waiting for them. Her chestnut brown hair was tied back loosely, a few strands escaping to frame her pale face. She wore a long beige coat over dark jeans and mud-stained boots. Clothes practical for work, but elegant in their fit. Her hazel eyes were sharp and restless, the kind that could catch both detail and emotion in the same glance. She carried a leather satchel and a vintage camera slung across her shoulder. "Mr. Miles," she called out, her voice clear but softened by the wind. Jacob nodded warily. "Depends who's asking." "Clara Bennett," she replied, stepping closer. "I write for the Miller Creek Chronicle. I heard about your bridge." "Didn't know it was news," he said, returning to his work. "Around here, $2 miracles don't happen every day," she said with a faint smile. "Mind if I take a look?" Jacob shrugged. "As long as you don't fall in." Clara walked slowly across the first few boards, careful where she stepped. Her boots thudded lightly on the new planks Jacob had just installed. "You really paid $2 for this?" "Best deal I ever made," he said without looking up. She crouched near one of the newly reinforced joints, tracing the clean grain of the fresh wood. "You rebuild bridges for a living?" "Used to," he replied. "Army Corps of Engineers. Then I stopped believing in what I built." Clara tilted her head, studying him. "And now?" "Now I'm trying again." Her expression softened. She adjusted her camera and began taking photos. The beams, the weathered bolts, Jacob's rough hands steadying the plank, and Rex watching from the riverbank. Each click of the shutter echoed like a heartbeat. "The locals call this the $2 bridge," she said. "They also call me crazy," Jacob muttered. "Maybe," she replied, "but the good kind." When he didn't answer, she wandered toward the rail where a piece of paper fluttered. Jacob had pinned it there days ago, the first page of Emma Bell's recovered journal. Clara brushed a droplet of rain off the corner and began to read aloud. "Father says every bridge is a prayer in wood. Each nail, a promise that someone will come home." Her voice faltered slightly. "Where did you find this?" "Under the planks," Jacob said. "It belonged to Emma Bell. She was the bridge-keeper's daughter. Died sometime after the war." Clara's brow furrowed. She flipped through a few more lines, her eyes scanning quickly. Then she froze. "Wait, here." Her voice trembled as she pointed to a list of names Emma had written in the back of the journal. Soldiers who had crossed the bridge on their way to the front. This name, Thomas Bennett. He was my grandfather. Jacob looked up sharply. "You're sure?" "Positive," she whispered. "He died before I was born. My grandmother used to tell me he crossed this bridge the night before he left for Europe. I thought it was just a story." Her fingers tightened around the page. The wind shifted, lifting the edges of the journal like something alive. "Guess this bridge kept more memories than anyone thought," Jacob said quietly. Clara closed the journal, holding it close as if it were something sacred. "You're not just fixing wood, Mr. Miles. You're mending history." He smiled faintly. "Maybe, but history's heavy work." The rain eased by afternoon, leaving the valley washed clean. Clara stayed, refusing to leave despite Jacob's insistence that she didn't need to get her boots dirty. She helped carry boards, fetched coffee from a thermos, and even fed Rex half her sandwich when she thought Jacob wasn't looking. By dusk, they sat together near the small fire he'd built beside the bridge, steam rising from their wet clothes. "You really believe this place matters?" she asked. Jacob stared into the flames. "I believe people built it to reach each other. Maybe that's enough." Clara smiled, her face glowing in the firelight. "I'm going to write about this. The world should know." "Just don't make me sound like a saint," he said. "I still curse when I drop a nail." She laughed softly. "I'll call it the bridge that heard prayers." The title hung in the air between them, warm and certain. Over the next few days, Clara returned with supplies: paint, nails, bread, coffee. She took more photos, asked more questions, but never intruded. Her article appeared the following Sunday, and the headline stretched across the front page: "The Bridge That Heard Prayers, Veterans' $2 Miracle Brings a Town Together." Within a week, people began showing up. Bill Turner, a retired carpenter with sawdust in his beard, arrived first, hauling a toolbox and a grin. "Figured you could use a real hammer," he said. Then came Martha Hayes, a widow in her 60s, gray hair tied in a bun, carrying a basket of wildflowers. "Every bridge needs color," she told Clara, setting the flowers along the rail. Even a group of schoolchildren came with brushes, painting the posts pale yellow and blue, while Rex supervised with his usual solemn dignity. The bridge slowly transformed. The cracks were sealed, the beams replaced, the wood sanded smooth until it gleamed in the sunlight. Jacob worked harder than ever, but for the first time, he wasn't alone. When the final coat of paint dried, the bridge stood proud again. Not perfect, but strong. That evening, Clara returned with a new sign. She held it up, smiling. "You can't charge tolls on a miracle," she teased. Jacob chuckled. "What's it say?" She flipped it around. In bold letters burned into the wood: "The Bridge That Heard Prayers, Rebuilt with Faith and Hands." Jacob nodded slowly, his throat tight. "That's right." They nailed it to the entrance together. As the sun set, its light spilled across the planks like gold, and the bridge glowed as if the river itself had blessed it. Rex barked once, tail wagging, and Clara laughed. "Guess he approves?" "He's got better judgment than most men," Jacob said. The wind carried the faint echo of distant church bells from town, mingling with the rush of the river below. The bridge creaked softly, alive again. For 3 weeks, Blackwater basked in the strange calm that comes after good work. The bridge stood firm and proud, its new planks gleaming honey gold under the sun. Children crossed it on bicycles, old couples strolled at dusk, and the river below whispered instead of growled. But on the 4th week, the whispers turned to warnings. It began with a chill in the wind, the kind that carried the scent of faraway rain. By dusk, clouds had gathered over the valley like bruises, and thunder rolled beyond the hills. Jacob Miles stood by the bridge, watching the sky darken to iron. Rex, his loyal German shepherd, stood at his heel, fur bristling, eyes fixed on the horizon. Clara Bennett joined them, camera slung across her shoulder, her hair tied back beneath a gray wool cap. "The weather report said it'll pass," she said, but her tone lacked conviction. "It never just passes in Montana," Jacob muttered. That night, the storm came hard and fast. Rain hammered the riverbanks, turning dust to mud and paths to streams. By midnight, the Blackwater River had risen nearly 6 feet, its surface foaming white under flashes of lightning. The new concrete bridge that connected the two halves of town shuddered beneath the weight of the flood. From his cabin near the river, Jacob heard the crack first, a sound like the earth splitting open. He rushed outside, rain slashing his face, and saw the concrete bridge tilt under the roaring current. In a single horrifying moment, the middle span crumbled, vanishing into the black water below. The lights from the town across the river flickered, then went out. Sirens wailed faintly in the distance. Within minutes, a dozen people had gathered near the edge of the collapsed bridge: farmers, shopkeepers, and families holding lanterns. Clara arrived soon after, soaked through, her breath clouding the air. "The west side's cut off," she shouted. "There are people stranded, kids from the Miller Creek school trip, a few families, maybe more." Jacob's jaw tightened. How many? At least 15, she said. The rescue trucks can't cross. They're trying from upstream, but the current's too strong. Jacob looked toward the old wooden bridge, the one everyone had once called a lost cause. The rain poured down its railings, the boards glistening like wet gold in the stormlight. It'll never hold, someone muttered behind him. She's new built, but not for this. Jacob turned sharply. It was built for exactly this. The townsfolk fell silent. He faced Clara. You said there were children? Yes, she nodded, rain streaking her cheeks. On the far bank, near the firehouse. They've got flashlights, but the road's gone. He looked down at Rex, who was already standing at the bridge's edge, tail stiff, eyes forward. You stay with me, buddy, Jacob said. Then, louder, to everyone. Get ropes, lanterns, and blankets. We're bringing them back. The crowd hesitated. The river's roar was deafening, the old bridge trembling under its own courage. Then, before anyone could speak, Rex leapt forward. The dog dashed across the slick boards, his paws thudding against the wood, water splashing underfoot. His bark echoed through the storm, a defiant sound that cut through thunder. Clara gasped. He's really going. Then so are we, Jacob said, tightening the rope around his waist. He grabbed a lantern, the flame flickering wildly, and stepped onto the bridge. Each board groaned, but held. Clara followed, clutching her camera in one hand, though it was long past the time for stories. The river below surged, battering the supports, sending spray up like shattered glass. Keep low, Jacob shouted over the wind. They moved slowly, step by step, until the far bank came into view, shadowy figures waving frantically in the dark. A flash of lightning illuminated them. Half a dozen children huddled with 2 teachers, their clothes soaked, faces pale with fear. Hold on, Jacob called out. Rex had already reached them, barking and circling like a herder, guiding them toward the bridge. Follow the dog, one teacher yelled, her voice barely audible over the storm. The first few children stepped onto the planks, trembling. The bridge swayed, water licking at their boots. Jacob stretched out his arm. One at a time, hands on the rope. He caught the first child, pulling her in close, steadying her. You're okay, keep moving. Clara held a lantern high behind him, her face wet, her eyes fierce with determination. One by one, they crossed. The children, the teachers, then 2 townsmen who had been helping carry supplies. Each crossing felt like a lifetime, the boards beneath their feet groaning under the strain. When the last of the group stepped onto solid ground, the river roared louder, rising still. That's everyone, Clara shouted, voice shaking. No, Jacob said, turning back toward the bridge. Rex isn't back yet. She stared, realizing he was right. The dog was still halfway across, barking into the wind as debris slammed against the supports. Rex, come, Jacob yelled. The dog paused, then began running, but a log struck the side rail, snapping one of the planks loose. The bridge shuddered violently. Lightning split the sky, and for an instant, the world turned white. Through that blinding light, Jacob saw Rex standing firm in the center of the bridge, soaked and shining, barking toward the heavens as if daring the storm to take him. The thunder that followed shook the valley, but the bridge held. When the light faded, Rex bounded forward, leaping into Jacob's arms at the far edge. The townsfolk erupted in shouts and tears. Clara dropped to her knees, laughing and crying all at once. He did it, she whispered. They both did. Jacob set Rex down, running a hand through the dog's wet fur. Good boy, he breathed. Good. Brave boy. Behind them, the bridge trembled but stood, the river raging beneath like an exhausted beast. Lanterns glowed on both banks as people embraced, their breath steaming in the cold. The town of Blackwater, once divided by water and doubt, was whole again. Later, when the storm had passed and the stars returned, Clara took a single photograph, the bridge glistening under the moonlight, water still dripping from its beams, the dog resting beside Jacob at its foot. It was the picture that would appear on front pages across the state, under one headline: "The $2 bridge that saved Blackwater." Dawn broke over Blackwater like a held breath released. The storm had spent itself, leaving the valley wrapped in silver mist. The river, swollen and bruised from its rage, now moved slow and sullen beneath the pale light. Where the concrete bridge had stood, there was only ruin, jagged slabs of gray jutting from the current like broken teeth. But a few hundred yards downstream, the old wooden bridge, the $2 miracle, still stood. Its beams glistened with dew, and its planks, though battered, held firm. It looked less like wood and more like memory made solid. Jacob Miles stood at the riverbank, coat soaked, boots caked with mud. His face was drawn but calm, eyes following the steam that rose off the wet earth. Beside him, Rex sat upright, tail curled neatly around his paws, his fur matted but his posture proud. The dog's amber eyes reflected the bridge like a mirror, as if guarding it even now. Behind them, the townsfolk began to gather, quietly, reverently. Clara Bennett arrived first, her hair still damp from the night, her beige coat streaked with river silt. She held her camera against her chest, but for once, she didn't raise it. She simply looked. Her eyes were red from exhaustion and something softer. Gratitude, maybe. "It's still standing," she whispered. Jacob nodded slowly. "Told you it would." Clara managed a tired smile. "You sound smug for a man who fought a river." "Didn't fight it," he said, rubbing Rex's head. "Just asked it to hold back a little longer." One by one, the townspeople stepped closer, Bill Turner with his cap in hand, Martha Hayes carrying a small bouquet of wildflowers tied with twine, and the Miller Creek schoolchildren who had crossed the bridge last night. They were still pale from fear, but their laughter had returned in small bursts. The mayor, Henry Cole, an older man with a round face, white mustache, and the weary dignity of someone who had spent a lifetime mediating farmers' disputes, approached Jacob. He wore a brown coat, patched at the elbows and boots still wet from trudging through the mud. "Miles," he said, voice hoarse, "that bridge of yours just saved 30 lives." "It's not mine," Jacob replied. "It belongs to everyone who believed in fixing it." The mayor nodded, clearing his throat. "We'll rebuild the concrete bridge, sure, but this one, we'll keep it as it is. A reminder." His words carried through the mist, and heads bowed around him in agreement. Later that morning, as the fog lifted, the townspeople worked together to clear the debris around the bridge. Someone brought timber, another rope. A few repaired the railings that had splintered during the storm. Clara walked to the center span, where the planks still bore faint scuff marks from boots and paws. She carried with her the small tin box, the one Jacob had found weeks before, still containing Emma Bell's journal. The edges were rusted now, the hinge barely holding, but the words inside were safe. She knelt near the railing, brushing away a film of frost. "She should stay here," Clara said softly, "where she can still listen." Jacob joined her, leaning on the rail. "You sure it'll last?" "I'll make sure of it," she said. She opened the tin box one last time, the smell of cedar faint but familiar. Gently, she slipped the notebook inside a glass case someone had brought from town. A display box meant for the library, repurposed for the bridge. On the lid, she etched with her penknife, Emma Bell, 1943. "Every bridge is a prayer in wood." When she was done, She fastened the box to the railing with iron clamps. The wind stirred, flipping one of the notebook's corners as if in acknowledgement. The children began tying folded pieces of paper to the railings, handmade prayers scribbled in pencil and crayon. "Thank you for holding us." "For those who never made it home?" "Please keep Mom safe next time it rains." Their small voices filled the air, weaving with the soft creak of the planks. Martha Hayes laid her flowers at the bridge's center beam, whispering, "This old girl did more than any church roof ever did." Bill chuckled quietly beside her, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "Guess wood remembers prayers better than stone." As the morning grew brighter, Clara finally lifted her camera. The click was gentle this time, reverent, a record of peace, not proof of chaos. She framed Jacob and Rex against the light, the bridge stretching behind them like a hymn in timber. When she lowered the camera, she turned to him. "What will you do now?" He thought for a long moment, watching the sunlight spread over the water. "Maybe fix what else is broken," he said. "Doesn't have to be bridges." "You could stay," she offered. "The Chronicle could use someone who knows how to build things." Jacob smiled faintly. "I'm better with hammers than headlines." Clara tilted her head. "Sometimes they do the same work." They stood in silence for a while. The river had quieted, its surface smooth and forgiving. The reflection of the bridge shimmered, whole and golden, as if untouched by the night's violence. Jacob ran his hand along the damp rail, his fingers tracing the grain. "Sometimes," he said softly, "what we rebuild saves more than wood." Clara nodded. "And sometimes it saves us." The children's papers fluttered in the breeze, catching the sun as they lifted, tiny white sails rising into the blue. One by one, they broke free, drifting downriver like blessings on the current. From somewhere deep within the beams, a faint sound rose. A single creak, soft but clear, as if someone had stepped across the bridge once more. A few people turned toward the sound, eyes wide. Then the wind shifted, carrying only bird song. Jacob smiled quietly. "Guess Emma's still walking," he murmured. Rex barked once, low and content, then settled at his feet. The town began to disperse, voices fading into the hum of morning. The new sign, freshly carved, stood proudly at the entrance. The bridge that heard prayers, built for $2, saved a town. As the last rays of sunlight broke through the mist, they bathed the bridge in a warm, golden glow. The planks gleamed like polished faith. Jacob took one last look before turning to leave, his dog at his side, his steps slow but certain. Behind him, the bridge stood silent but alive, a monument not to strength but to belief, a prayer answered in wood and hands and heart. Sometimes God's miracles don't arrive as thunder or light. They come as quiet hands rebuilding something the world forgot. Jacob's $2 bridge wasn't just wood and nails. It was faith made visible. Proof that what's built with love can outlast any storm. And maybe that's the same in our lives. Every broken thing we mend, every kindness we give, becomes a bridge for someone else to cross. So if you're watching this tonight, remember, no act of love is ever wasted, and no bridge of faith ever stands alone. God still walks with those who build, and He still listens to those who pray. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs a little hope today. Comment your thoughts below. Subscribe to our channel to follow more stories of faith and redemption. And may God bless you, wherever your bridge may lead.